session during this second ASWAN forum. Our session this afternoon is going to be on harnessing trade for a peaceful and prosperous Africa. We actually have a great panel with us, and I'm looking forward, and I hope you're also looking forward to 75 minutes of engaging conversations as we listen to two ambassadors and one leading lawyer who has been working a lot on the continent. So before I go further to introduce our speakers, allow me to provide some context to this session. Of course, we all agree that trade and investment can help advance peace, security, and development in Africa, and especially at this time of the pandemic, which has, of course, the pandemic has actually had a big impact on our economies. We have also seen a decline, or rather a fall, in the FDI. We've seen our economies struggling with debt, and we are really not sure how soon or how quick we are going to recover from this pandemic, both in terms of what's happening on our trade flows and also on what is happening on the burden of debt. Now, the establishment of strong ties that are forged by mutual trade and investment between African states, of course, can help foster great prosperity. Those of you who have been following the main theme or the main motto of Agenda 2063, it's basically the creation of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa. Now, and it's always good to think of the integrated in two perspectives. It's the integration of the African countries and African economies within the continent, but also more importantly, the integration of the continent to the global economy. And this has to happen in a peaceful environment. And of course, without peace, any prosperity that you get from this integration, you cannot be able to enjoy it if there is no peace. So the session that we are going to have now, we are going basically to discuss some of these issues. Now, the pandemic has actually made some major changes to the way things are done. And I think a lot of us at the beginning of the pandemic were very upset when we saw a situation whereby supply chains were breaking down and the multilateral rules or international trade rules were actually being set aside as there was competition for COVID supplies. And many of us may also feel that in the last couple of weeks, we were not very happy to see a situation whereby countries were tending to say that they do not want to see vaccines being leaving their jurisdiction to be supplied to other parts of the world. And we know we can never have a prosperous environment and a peaceful environment where in a situation like the pandemic that we have now, you have some people having access to some goods and services or some supplies and others not being able to do that. So I do hope that we would be able to get insights from the panel on how we can harness trade for a peaceful and prosperous Africa. First, by hearing also from Ambassador Muchanga, how he sees this in the context of the AFC Cfta. Hearing from DDG Wolff on the initiative of Trade for Peace, which we are privileged as ECA to have been associated with because there are quite a number of African countries that are acceding to the WTO, and this process, this initiative is working very closely with these acceding countries. And of course, from Toyin, who will tell us what's happening on the private sector. But we also have a message from the Minister of Trade, the Minister of Trade from Sudan, who is also going to tell us how Sudan is hoping to take advantage of trade to consolidate the new Sudan that we see today. So with this introduction, let me introduce our speakers. So we'll have Ambassador Wolff, Alan Wolff, who is the Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. He's going to intervene first. And then we'll have a message, a recorded message from Minister of Trade and Supply of the Republic of Sudan, His Excellency Ali Giddo Adam. Then we will receive Ambassador Albert Muchanga. And then after that, we are going to listen to Toyin Umesiri. Now, each of the panelists is going to have about 9 minutes for the first round. Then we'll have an open discussion with the participants, and then we are going to go back for a final round. So DDG Wolff, the Trade for Peace initiative aims at supporting countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence in their journey to economic growth and development. And so the initiative lays the foundation for long-term peace and security, as well as facilitating the integration of these countries into the multilateral trading system. Can you please elaborate to us on the objectives of the Trade for Peace initiative that was recently launched by the WTO? And also tell us what are the major challenges that are facing the implementation of this Trade for Peace initiative, and how can collaboration with other international organizations, and of course regional organizations like the African Union, can help overcome these challenges? You have 9 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that eloquent introduction to us. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I wish that we're in person. That's not happening much these days because of the pandemic. I'd like to thank the government of Egypt and the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping, and Peace Building for inviting me on behalf of the WTO to participate. The multilateral trading system, with its over 70 years of history, is at a critical juncture. The outbreak of COVID-19 is exacerbating existing insecurities around the world. As you alluded to, African countries have been especially hard hit by the economic impact of the crisis, which has increased social tensions, the likelihood of conflict as a result. Relief from the pandemic, its challenges to health, as well as to the African economies, is far from assured. Home to many fragile and conflict-affected countries, the continent is under extreme pressure to find means for stimulating post-COVID-19 recovery. Africa must meet not only the challenge presented by the pandemic, but also overcome the structural issues that have long predated the pandemic. Tackling these challenges will allow countries to transition from fragility to stability. This year, there's been a very positive development on two fronts. One is the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, milestone in the quest of regional development. And the WTO and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement are intertwined, as are all regional trade agreements, since they all rest upon the rules of the multilateral trading system. A challenge for African leaders and the 164 members of the WTO is how best to harness the new energy from Afc Cfta to recover the ground lost to development on the African continent during the pandemic. I mentioned two positive developments. A second positive development, of course, is for Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to join us this week, starting on Monday of this week, bringing a new burst of energy. She is a spirit that imbues this organization with new life. It is fantastic. So we're deeply appreciative of that. The time is overdue for Africa to gain solid benefit from both regional and multilateral economic integration. This has to be a major objective for both Africa and the multilateral trading system, in which Africa has a strong voice, stronger today than it was last week. All 44 African WTO members and 9 WTO observers are signatories to the Continental Free Trade Agreement, And of the 24 countries seeking to join the WTO, 9 are from Africa. The WTO, through its Trade for Peace program, seeks to harness trade to alleviate the economic and social consequences of conflict and crises, not just this current pandemic, but the structural difficulties that have plagued many of the least able to support the burden. It promotes an interdisciplinary understanding of trade, peace, and humanitarian approaches. In 2017, a group of fragile and conflict-affected least developed countries in the process of accession to the WTO, Comoros, Sao Tome and Principe, Somalia, South Sudan, and Timor-Leste, came together with 2 recently exceeding LDCs, those who joined in 2015, the WTO, Afghanistan, 3, Afghanistan, Liberia, and Yemen, and made the case that trade and economic integration can be employed to promote inclusive and sustainable peace, particularly for their countries. This was at the 11th Ministerial Conference in Buenos Aires in December of 2017, and the ministers from these countries established what they called the G7 Plus WTO Accessions Group. The group captures the original raison d'etre of the WTO to contribute to global peace and stability, which they understand remains critical to today. WTO accession represents a tool to strengthen the rule of law, ensure policy predictability and transparency, and promote international cooperation. Creating an environment that fosters economic development, raises the standard of living for all, and attracts foreign investment, and establishes the conditions for these countries to move out of a state of fragility or of conflict into a state of stability, peace, and economic well-being. WTO accession can be a lengthy process. It requires a high-level political commitment coupled with deep domestic economic reforms. Market access and rules-based commitments are made in the process of years of negotiation. These commitments reflect the current commercial interest of both existing members and the acceding country, and it causes a continual updating of the rules. So there are 9 countries in the process from Africa in the process of accession today. Countries from the Horn of Africa are the most active. Early last year, Ethiopia resumed its accession process after nearly 8 years of dormancy by holding its 4th Working Party meeting. Following the signature of the Juba Peace Agreement and the removal of Sudan from the United States list of countries sponsoring terrorism last year, that country has renewed its commitment to advancing its accession process. And with the appointment of a new trade minister last month, Sudan is taking decisive steps to reap the full benefits of trade integration through WTO membership, including the holding of an informal working party, which is happening next week at the WTO, which is really a wonderful development, given where Sudan has been. South Sudan is also engaged in its accession process. Its first working party meeting was held in 2019. Somalia hopes to hold its first working party meeting this year for accessions. And to the south of the Horn in the Indian Ocean, Comoros represents one of the most advanced among all ongoing accession processes. In spite of the many hurdles that these countries face, the status of accession of fragile and conflict-affected countries to the WTO not only remains hopeful, but it's been accelerated this year, really, and last year because of the pandemic. It's more important than ever. The outlook is only made possible by fresh momentum that is building from all stakeholders. Now, there are many synergies between the ASWAN, Cfta, and WTO. Notwithstanding the structural and recent challenges facing fragile and conflict-affected countries in Africa, a strong commitment is expressed by many African leaders to deliver the timely implementation of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, a process that began in January of this year. The Afc Cfta is expected to boost inter-African trade through elimination of tariffs. This can be a vital contributor to driving the post-pandemic economic recovery, as well as longer-term growth and value addition to trade, not only for Africa, but for the world. If Africa grows, the world can grow at a better rate. So it has the potential to address the issues of unemployment of youth and women, and it's critical to promote peace, stability, and development for the continent. At Trade for Peace Week, organized by the WTO just over a year ago in Addis Ababa, Albert Muchanga, who joined us today, stated that the agreement, AFC Cfta, can assist in silencing the guns in Africa, which that was a call that resonated in the hall, I might say. We remember it. More open trade is designed to foster development and make more likely the maintenance of peace. It increases the cost of going to war because there's far more to lose than to gain. Sustainable development requires durable peace, as our moderator said at the beginning. The benefits of AFC Cfta include generating opportunities for the self-advancement of all Africans, stimulating investment, and allowing African countries to get much greater benefit from the multilateral trading system. Both the multilateral trading system embodied in the WTO and the AFC Cfta contribute to economic development and therefore foster peace. And the opening of the Havana Charter cited peace as a reason for why the countries came together after World War II to form the International Trade Organization, which then became the GATT, a contractual arrangement that eventually led to the WTO being founded in 1995. So I won't quote it, but it's the objectives of CFTA, AFC Cfta, in Article 3 point the way, establishing a vision of an integrated and prosperous, peaceful Africa. So it's clear that these two agreements, the multilateral agreement and the the trade agreement of Africa, share a common goal and a common heritage, the use of trade for peace. To that end, we must work together. The WTO Secretariat is committed to expand and deepen collaboration with our partners in the continent, including the African Union, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and the AFC Cfta Secretariat, to make the most of the synergies and complementarities between the Continental Agreement and the WTO acquis. We also appreciate the work of the ASWAN Forum as a high-level platform for sustainable peace and development in Africa. In this respect, I want to announce that we welcome the proposal requesting the WTO to become a knowledge partner of the ASWAN Forum. This would greatly enhance the work of Trade for Peace program for the continent. I'll stop there, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DDG Wolff. Okay, so now I'll pass it to the Secretariat to put on the message from the Minister, Ali Giddo. And essentially, the Minister is supposed to talk to us on how trade is a key instrument that enhances competitiveness and allows states to trade goods and services. He is to answer the question how the Sudanese government foresee trade as a key tool for economic recovery and transition towards sustainable peace beyond the pandemic. So, Nur, we have the video.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيدتي الجلسة، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني ويشرفني أن أشارك في أعمال منتدى أسوان السلام والتنمية المستدامة النسخة الثانية في البث. نشكر حرص جمهورية مصر العربية على إقامة هذا المنتدى على الرغم من الظروف الاستثنائية التي يعيشها العالم جراء جائحة الكورونا، وحرصها على كيفية التصدي لها لتحقيق أجندة الاتحاد الأفريقي من أجل توطيد العلاقات بين الدول الأفريقية. سيدتي الجلسة، السيدات والسادة، لقد تسببت جائحة كورونا في تفاقم الأزمة الاقتصادية لدول القارة الأفريقية، وأكد أيضا ضرورة انتقال الدول الأفريقية من الاكتفاء بإدارة الأزمات إلى تعزيز جهود الوقاية منها وزيادة المرونة في التعامل معها في إطار استراتيجيات التعافي بشكل أقوى وإعادة البناء بشكل أفضل وتوحيد الجهود تسوية النزاعات وتعزيز قدرات دول القارة لتطبيق الحوكمة الشاملة وأنظمة الرعاية الصحية وإعادة تصميم العقود الاجتماعية والسير قدما في طريق السلام والتنمية المستدامين وفق أجندة 2063 وأجندة الأمم المتحدة للتنمية المستدامة 2030. سيد رئيس الجلسة، السيدات والسادة، إن السودان دولة محبة للسلام، وقد قام الشعب السوداني بثورة ديسمبر المجيدة الذي ابتلع أعتى نظام استبدادي في التاريخ الحديث، وذلك من أجل تحقيق الحرية والسلام والعدالة والحكم الراشد والديمقراطية. وتم توقيع اتفاقية سلام جوبا الذي أسكت صوت الجمهورية لتعود حركات الكفاح المسلح إلى حضن الوطن للمشاركة في الحكومة الانتقالية النسخة الثانية حكومة السلام. وبذلك السودان نموذجا افريقيا رائدا في ارساء دعائم السلام والامن في القاره. ايضا السودان يحترم حسن الجوار ويسعى الى حل الخلافات والنزاعات مع دول الجوار بالطرق السلميه مع نبذ الاحترام. سيدة الجلسه، السيدات والساده، نؤكد حرص السودان بدعم الاندماج في مشروعات القاره الافريقيه التي تعزز من زيادة التعاون الاقتصادي والتجاري المتمثل في حرصه على المشاركة المنتظمة في مفاوضات اتفاقية منطقة التجارة الحرة القاهرية وسعيه الدؤوب المصادقة على الاتفاقية في القريب العاجل، والعمل على إنجاح جهود الدول الأفريقية للتنفيذ العملي لهذه الاتفاقية بعد أن دخلت حيز التنفيذ مطلع هذا العام، وذلك تحقيقا للحلم الافريقي الذي طال انتظاره، الا وهو التكامل القاري لتحقيق سوق افريقي واسع موحد للتبادل التجاري في السلع والخدمات. في الختام نتطلع ان يخرج هذا المنتدى بنتائج وتوصيات عمليه محدده اقتصادي في الافريقيه. اشكركم.
Thank you very much. That was a very positive message from the honorable minister. I like, in fact, when I was preparing to be here and I was thinking that he's going to be here in person, I was going to tell him, you know, your prime minister, who is actually the predecessor of the seat that I'm sitting on, because he's a former director of trade and regional integration in the Economic Commission for Africa. And so he was part and parcel of this advancement of the integration agenda within the continent. And to hear the minister also provide us with such a crisp, positive message on how Sudan is hoping to bring together all the African Union development frameworks towards making the AFC Cfta succeed is good. And I think Commissioner Muchanga, you have your work cut out there to follow up on the ratification and everything that comes with that. So let me now pass the floor now to Commissioner Muchanga. Now, for those of you who know Commissioner Muchanga as the Commissioner for Trade and Industry, he's now the Commissioner for Economic Development, Traded Industry within the African Union under the Reformed Commission. And so the whole economic pillar will be driven by the leadership of Commissioner Muchanga, which of course, through the AFCFTA realization, he has demonstrated we can do this. And so the question to you, Excellency, is to what extent has this framework of collaboration been put in practice? Now, the framework of collaboration here is the AU proposed framework of collaboration between the African Union Commission, the Secretariat of the AFC Cfta, and the Secretariats of the Regional Economic Communities to facilitate synergy by overcoming overlaps and duplication in the process and promote efficiency in advancing the agenda of the African economic integration. I know this is an area that you have been working on. So Commissioner Muchanga, you have your 9 minutes to respond to that.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and the moderator of this session. I'm very happy to have been invited by the government of Sudan to this forum, and I'm very happy also to see my good friends, Alan and Toyin. Let me contextualize the question by saying that when you look at the landscape of Africa, you've got a lot of initiatives. First of all, we have got the national economies, and then you have got the regional economic communities, and then you have got the African Union, whose secretariat is the African Union Commission, and now we have got the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And the common objective of all these initiatives are to deliver prosperity for Africa. Now, if you have to deliver prosperity for Africa, you need to align initiatives. And this is much easier because some of the principles that we have in the African Union Commission are: one, subsidiarity. We do things where they're best done at. Then complementarity. So whatever we do should be fully aligned. And then policy and program coherence. And when you achieve all this, one, you save on the resources. And two, the impact is going to be greater. So when we were establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, we foresaw the need to have such an arrangement. So we developed it, looking at all the strategic issues that need to be, where collaboration is needed. Issues of trade facilitation, and a broader issue of customs cooperation, issues of development of regional value chains, among others, were all covered, including issues of transit trade, they were covered. And when we are developing it, that's also at the time when the reform process in the African continental, in the African Union Commission also took hold. And therefore, we transferred it at 2 levels. We gave the text to the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and also gave another text to the reform unit in the Bureau of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission. And the Bureau were very, very, very happy with that. And so what they did is to use it as the basis for coming up with the division of labor among all the entities involved in promoting cooperation and integration across the African Union system. And there's going to be division labor on a very, very sectoral basis. Economic affairs or economic development with peace and security, science and technology, the regional economic communities, and so forth. That work is underway among the various institutions in the system. And the target is to conclude it by July this year, so that when you have the coordination summit of the African Union, represented by the Bureau, as well as the chairpersons of all the 8 regional economic communities represented by the heads of state and government, they'll be able to look at that clear division of labor. And in the process, it will assist us to realize the vision of creating one African market. Because this issue of overlap also reflects the defragmentation of African economies. Our economies are isolated from each other because of lack of linkages, transport, communication, and energy linkages, for example. They are isolated from each other because of high levels of tariff barriers. They are isolated from each other because of non-tariff barriers. When we bring in this and remove all these issues which separate us, then we'll be in a position where we can realize the vision of one African market. And the framework of collaboration is going to assist in this regard. I was preparing a wrong document, which has been secreted. You'll be able to read it. But I think, I hope I've answered the right question. Yes. Thank you. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Commissioner. That was actually the question, because I think for us to make trade effective, I think there are those people who have been asking, oh, we have the REX, we have the AUC, we have the AFC Cfta Secretariat. So how do we harness the power of trade effectively? And now what basically you have reminded us, actually there are some principles that will make this work: subsidiarity, coherence, comparative advantage, the division of labor based on these principles, and
complementarity.
So doing, yeah.
Complementarity.
And complementarity, and by so doing, of course, trade will be able to play its role, as we heard from DDG Wolff, in terms of fostering peace, making it very costly to have conflict, which is what trade is supposed to do. So at this point then, let me turn to Toyin. Toyin is the CEO of NAZARU LLC, which provides trainings, master classes, and business coaching. But it also provides a platform for business to business and business to government networking, creating pathways to economic growth in Africa. Moreover, the Trade with Africa Business Summit brings together trade experts, government officials, policymakers, researchers for knowledge sharing and explore trade and investment opportunities. So basically that's what NAZARU, led by Toyin, does. So as the CEO of NAZARU and also founder of the Trade with Africa Summit, you have a unique platform that leverages economic opportunities presented to both men and women and facilitates trade and investment channels in Africa. Now, so there is the fourth summit, whose title is A New Era, Trade and Diplomacy under the AFC Cfta. How will the summit explore the new economic pathways presented by the pandemic and also navigate the shifting economic landscape? And as you conclude, it would be good to hear, how do you see these fostering peace and prosperity, peace and security within the continent? So you have the floor, 9 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much. His Excellencies, moderator, all protocols duly observed. First, I want to thank the organizers of this incredible forum for this invitation. I also want to use this opportunity to thank His Excellency Ambassador Albert Muchanga, who is also on this panel. I want to publicly thank him again for visiting us here in Chicago at my invitation back in 2019, because for us, we wanted to stay abreast the changes on the continent, and he was able to deliver a resounding keynote on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement back in 2019, and our continued direct line to your office, His Excellency, has really allowed the trade, investor, and buying community that I lead for us to stay current with all the changes and shifts. And I just want to publicly thank you for always responding to my inquiries and my emails and all of that. So I really do appreciate it, and the community I lead also extends our appreciation. And I look forward to a time, post-COVID, to be able to have you and your team again here in Chicago. But for now, what we've done is we've leveraged the power of technology. We've shifted our engagements fully digital, and trade and investment dialogues and engagements happen daily 24/7 on our platforms. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's a great time in history to be African. Despite COVID-19 impact, I believe the stars continue to align in our favor to support our common vision of advancing trade, peace, prosperity, and security in Africa in order for us to achieve the Agenda 2063 delivered to us by the leadership of the African Union member states. Trade is about wealth creation and also drives global wealth distribution. African nations must design robust strategies in order to capture the new and emerging trade opportunities that the AFCFTA presents, particularly to empower women and the youth at the grassroots level. Trade is key to unlocking Africa's economic potential. So how then do we go about, particularly in the private sector, how do we go about capturing trade and increasing these trade opportunities? That's what we do. Allow me to share a few insights based on our years of research and work at NAZARU and also the Trade with Africa platforms. Okay, so I have a couple of bullet points here that I want to highlight. The first one is that African nations need to prioritize export development and export promotion for made in African products. Yes, we know that AFCFTA creates a huge market for African products. However, what I strongly know is that only the nations that actually invest and prioritize export development will stand to benefit from this dynamic trade policy. So it's important because the AFCFTA creates a market for us to export our products within the African continent. So it's so important for us to invest time to help groom the private sector to be able to compete and also capture these emerging trade opportunities that AFCFTA presents on the continent. We must also secure market access and create enabling environment for our brothers and sisters from other African nations to thrive and win within our communities. This will ensure that we all win together as one African market. Industrialization is required to create and develop new economies across the continent through strategic partnerships, whether it's on the continent and even beyond. I sit here in the US, and I know for a fact that there are potential partners all over that reach out to us that make inquiries that what does Africa need, right? Is it in agriculture? Is it in manufacturing? Is it technical support? I think the private sector has a unique opportunity to liaise and engage with both foreign potential partners and even partners beyond their country and neighboring countries as well, for us to achieve and tap into the power that these partners present to us. Capacity mobilization efforts must be prioritized and fast-tracked for small, medium-sized enterprises across the continent to secure opportunities at the grassroots level. The large enterprises, they're able to capture trade faster than the small SMEs across the continent. So I think it's important for us to really attend to the needs, the unique needs of small, medium-sized enterprises to support them with capacity mobilization, with training and all of that. I think with the size of these SMEs in Africa, I think this is something we really have to pay close attention to in the private sector. We must also embrace a digital-first mindset. We must build the necessary underlying infrastructure needed to accelerate technology adoption across the continent. And we also have to digitize access to trade information to increase transparency and build trust in the system. The youth of Africa must be equipped to compete with the rest of the world when it comes to blockchain, artificial intelligence, through the adoption and acceleration of the true 5G backbone. We must also strengthen supply chains and develop the agricultural value chain. As we all know, Africa has at least 50 to 60% of the remaining arable land of the in the world. And this presents a unique opportunity in the private sector for us to enhance and develop, speed to market and product in movement through the supply chain, whether through digital trade or physical trade, whether e-commerce or still in store. I mean, post-COVID, obviously, but this is a unique opportunity for us in the private sector. And what I just presented are a few of the things we tackle daily on our business to business and business to government global network, where investors, buyers, exporters, government, and diaspora engage daily to see how we can continue to advance trade and do business with one another. One thing remains clear to me: foreign aid is a crutch that can never hold the weight of Africa's current ambitions. And because of this, we must mobilize the private sector to go after foreign direct investment required to jumpstart our economic recovery. The Trade with Africa Business Summit is a private sector-led engagement, but supported by government agencies, associations, chambers of commerce, and trade financing institutions, such as the African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank, and the Export-Import Bank of the United States of America. And I also want to use this opportunity just to say a special thanks to Afreximbank for continuing to partner with us and support us, and for Mrs. Kanayo also visiting us in Chicago as well to really deliver a keynote on the role of trade finance institution in advancing trade across the continent. So I really do appreciate the work that they do at Afreximbank. Africa's private sector must continue to strengthen, must continue to be strengthened, because the prosperity and peace for all Africa actually rely on the prosperity and the advancement of Africa's private sector. One of the things that remains clear to me is that the last 20, 30 years, we've focused primarily on the policy side, and I understand that. But what I have seen is that policy implementation requires private sector engagement and mobilization, and that is a key thing that we do at NAZARU. Finally, as the world continues to turn its ears to Africa, we must ensure that we have a collective message and a strong voice that is clear, loud, and persistent. We must share with the world who we are as a people, our true identity, and what we demand from our partners and all those who wish to engage in our markets. Africa must now race to create a dynamic future that allows our people to compete effectively in the global marketplace and become a force under the AFC Cfta. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Stephen.
No, thank you so much, Toyin, for those points. I think this point about the private sector is so critical, and just you've demonstrated it very well by telling us, reminding us that it's when the private sector prospers that we will be able actually to mobilize the resources that we need to finance our development, and of course, consolidate peace. You've also brought in the issue of inclusivity also, especially the inclusivity of both women and youth. And the AFC Cfta, to be honest, even has articles that speak to that. And so we have to really figure out how do we operationalize this. And I think the linkages that you call for between the large corporations and the SMEs is where we will be able to operationalize these articles that are very specific to men, to women and youth through the SMEs. So that's our first round. And I think I'll put you back, my panel back on the mic, because there are 3 questions that have come from the floor. And I think the first question, I'm going to give it to Commissioner Muchanga. Commissioner, the question that has come from the floor is as follows. COVID-19 laid bare structural weaknesses in economic systems across the world, and particularly Africa. How can African countries leverage their research and development investments to play a vital role in building back better and recovering stronger? I don't know whether you got the gist of the question.
No, I got it. I got it. Thank you very much. It's a very pertinent question. I think one thing we realize is that there is an African Union Assembly decision that African countries must devote 1% of their GDP annual to promote research and development. Many of our countries have not really been able to meet that target. And as a result, what we find across Africa is that we really have very weak internal capabilities on technology and innovation. And that is a major constraint, because if you do not upgrade on the technology and the innovation, you are not able to be very competitive. And that can also be reflected in the fact that there are very few industrial designs across Africa. And if you look around, I think only about 5 African countries have institutes of industrial design. Again, that highlights the weakness. Now, COVID-19 disrupted everything. Global value chains were disrupted. And I think it was indicated earlier that vaccine nationalism is also coming up. So for Africa to survive, we need to develop internal capabilities in technology and innovation. My message has been that all the African governments must really meet their commitments on putting aside 1% of their GDP towards research and development. And then they should use that money to ensure that the academia, they go into research and development, and also upgrade their universities so that they become research universities. Then in an equally important manner, our private sector must also undertake process engineering so that they develop the capacity to make use of the outputs of research and development coming from the research activities of our universities. And to keep this as a going concern, there's need for regular dialogue among the governments, the academia, and the private sector on issues of developing internal capabilities on the technology and innovation. And that way we'll be able to go through it. During this process, there has been a call by Africa that there should be a waiver on intellectual property rights to facilitate the production of vaccines in the fight against the COVID-19. That request was approved by the heads of state and government. It has now gone to the WTO. The African group is trying to secure co-sponsorships, but as indicated by Alan, negotiations in the WTO take quite a long time. And this brings the importance of developing internal capabilities in technology and innovation. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Commissioner Muchanga. Thank you, thank you. And in fact, on where you have added is to also let our participants know that the phase 2 of the AFC Cfta will also deal with the intellectual property rights. It will have a protocol on that. So the call that you are making of the 1% of GDP investments on R&D will happen within an environment where there is actually a continental policy on this. Now, the second question that has come from the floor, which I'm going to pose to you, Excellency Ambassador Wolff. The COVID-19 pandemic is having a significant adverse impact on the private sector, including businesses and individuals in fragile and conflict-affected situations? How can countries create an enabling business environment that unleashes the potential of young African entrepreneurs and allow the private sector to play their much needed role in building back better? So, Ambassador Wolff.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Of course, the WTO doesn't engage in trade. It sets the rules of trade. It's those in the private sector who engage in trade. And as Albert has said, it's imperative that innovation be fostered. In a prior incarnation of my own, I was chairman of the Comparative Innovation Policy Committee of the National Academies in the United States. And we met with other countries and we looked at what they were doing and what the United States was doing. And the fact of the matter is, everyone comes up short. That's not to say that China and the United States and the EU are not ahead in this game, but they look inside and they say they didn't do what is necessary to create the right environment. Part of that is intellectual property protection, which Africa will come to grips with, but part of it is education. Part of it's the right tax policies, but it's also being able to have a world market. And in Africa, being able to have a continental market. If there's growth across borders of trade, this will stimulate the demand that creates the employment, creates the need for innovation. Innovation is stifled by trade restrictions. And when it comes to COVID-19, it has a pervasive effect on, of course, the health of everyone around the world. This is not a national issue, it's an international issue, it's a global issue. And Dr. Ngozi has said, and I think she comes from Gavi, she comes from chairing an organization dedicated to the vaccines, production of vaccines. We need to work on two tracks. We need to work on the TRIPS waiver and see what needs to be addressed with respect to TRIPS, see what the problems are, see whether there are restrictions in licenses, and also look at capability, capacity. And we'll find out that capacity, no matter where it is short of what is needed. And it should be, that calls for investment and that calls for stability. So this is not unrelated to peace. Peace is a precondition. It also means no export restrictions. There was a very vibrant debate this week in the WTO General Council about the potential and maybe actual export restrictions on vaccines. So the equation is several elements. One is where there is the potential for use of current facilities, which for some vaccines can happen, and for others it's too remote. They're too complex. The mRNA is very complex things that even leading in pharmaceutical companies are unable to produce it at present. But is there more capacity someplace in the developing world and in the rest of the world? Secondly, is there the ability to transfer technology so that, and investment so that there can be a greater supply? All of these things are interrelated. And I think Albert Muchanga and Toyin and Umesiri sort of teased out the various elements. The private sector is the solution. The question is, what are the rules that will give the private sector the stability, certainty, so that investment does take place? And so that's our business. But we're actively looking for solutions. And I think with Dr. Ngozi, especially with respect to vaccines, which is the #1 issue in the world today in terms of trade, we're not going to sit back. We're going to have a real dialogue and come to grips with the issue, and I hope make some real progress.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's a comprehensive response, and you touch on every bit of the question that was asked. So let me go back to Toyin before I go back now to the last question, where each of you will give us something. But Toyin, this question is asking, what are the 2 key enabling factors in economic policy development and formulation that would contribute to the realization of the aspirations of Agenda 2063 and 2030, Agenda 2030? It feels like that's a question that can also be addressed to me, but I think it's good to hear a private sector perspective on what you see to be 2 key enabling factors in economic policy development and formulation that would contribute to the realization of these 2 great agendas.
Yes. So my quick answer, I'm going to give a short answer and a more lengthy answer. The short answer is bring private sector to the room, to the table, as the policies are being crafted and designed. They are the ones to implement it. They are the ones to execute it. So they need to be a part of that decision making. That's my short answer. But my long answer is really, just to share a little bit about my background, what drives the work I do, and how we do this work. My background is serving in the world's largest company, Walmart's headquarters, working in merchandising, working in global sourcing, the decision-making process that the world's biggest buyer makes before they decide where they're going to buy, okay? And within the context of that global framework, what became evident to me was we weren't seeing Africa's private sector emerging on the landscape, meaning as the global decision-making process is being made, we weren't seeing the private sector coming to the table to declare, this is what I want to sell, this is what we want to buy, not at the global level and the scale that I was part of. And that is what motivates me to do all of this work, because what we have seen on our platform is transformation. When we provide market linkages for private sector, be it small business or large businesses on the continent, when we connect them to the market, magic happens. We have, for example, members from northern Nigeria where there's conflict today. We have members that have shipped face masks to the US market through market connectivity and training and coaching and hand-holding. That is the practical side of policy implementation in the private sector, is making sure that we're building capacity, but we're also hand-holding the businesses and connecting them to markets within the context of the AFCFTA. This is what I want to say. The AFCFTA has systematically created a huge, in an artificial way, it has created a huge demand for made in Africa. What this means in the private sector is you now have an assurance that there is a new demand for what it is you're producing, which then allows you to go into the trade financing institution. Because when you think about the cycle of trade development, you want demand, you want capacity building, you also need trade financing, because if there's demand and you want to build capacity, you need somebody to finance you. So those are the players that we do bring together. But one of the other things that personally gives me concern and means the reason I play a more active role when it comes to AFCFTA is because I've seen a somewhat similar policy like the African Growth and Opportunity Act that was created by the United States government. It has been on the books for 20 years, but as of today, we still find that we have to educate people. So education is key. We have to educate people. We have to mobilize the private sector to now use the AFCFTA. because having amazing policy is fantastic, but the private sector must be mobilized. And the other conversation finally that I have within the private sector is to inspire them and to encourage them to go out there and fish. Because sometimes we find out the private sector sits back, sometimes expecting that the information and knowledge and education that they need to sustain their business will come and meet them. So I coach the people I coach. I also teach them how to understand what the AFC Cfta is. What does it mean to their business? How can they leverage it? How can they start building partnerships beyond their own borders to actually lift this up and build prosperity for the people in their community through job creation?
No, thank you so much, Toyin. We have two very accomplished policymakers with us here and diplomats also, Ambassador Wolff and Ambassador Muchanga. And the interesting thing is the connection between what you're saying about private sector and what they are saying. And I think this question of the private sector in Africa, I think we've not paid enough attention to it. And I think the way you have said that the AFC Cfta has provided the demand, and what we need to do is actually to grow that capacity of our private sector to take, because they are assured of the market. And you have Afreximbank and even other financing institutions that are there because they know there is a market. So the risk of not being able to get money paid back is actually lessened, lowered by the existence of a market that actually has continental rules. So no, thank you very much for responding to that question in the way you have responded to it. So now we are going now to the final leg, and I think this one basically what I have before me is just to ask each one of you, and I think now we will start. No, I think we start again with Ambassador Wolff, so that you don't take the floor again immediately after. Yeah, so it's to ask each one of you to think of some action-oriented recommendation that on how African governments, specifically those in the context of conflict, could utilize the frameworks and tools at their disposal to harness trade towards achieving sustainable peace and security outcomes. It's actually a loaded question, I must say. How can African governments, specifically those in contexts of conflict, or maybe risk of conflict, utilize the frameworks and tools at their disposal to harness trade towards achieving sustainable peace and security outcomes? So DDG Wolff, I'll let you go first. I know you gave us the example of Liberia, Yemen, and yeah, so, but let's hear what you would want to say on this.
Well, thank you very much. What we're looking for is synergy. We have a series of communities that are really engaged in trying to help conflict-affected and fragile economies. We can do more together. So the Trade for Peace program is trying to bring together the communities of trade, peace, and the humanitarian workers, and see what we can do to elevate the development of assistance that's needed for the countries that are in this condition. In the WTO, it's about the accessions division. It's about bringing more technical assistance to the countries in the process of accession. There's a lot of domestic reform that has to take place in order to join the WTO. Albert Muchanga and I were in Addis Ababa, and there was a lot of optimism a year ago when we were there about the domestic program. And we talked about how it keyed into the international rules and joining the integration into the world economy, as well as integration across the African continent. the whole idea of a free trade agreement, theoretically, was not just to help those who are members of it, but to help the whole world by generating more trade creation than there would be trade diversion from lowering barriers on less than an equal basis for all. What are we doing in the Trade for Peace program? We have an annual Trade for Peace week, which elevates the issue. We create a platform and a Trade for Peace network to compare notes, to see what we can do with each other. We develop a white paper for Trade for Peace and development of training materials, modules for Trade for Peace, and now podcasts. It's a small effort, but it can have big returns if we concentrate on, we look at the acceding countries from our point of view in this organization. The fact is, everybody wants to help. And can we help more efficiently? That's why Afghanistan and Liberia and others at the WTO are very active in reaching out to help those who have not yet joined, who have not gone through the process of domestic reforms, and telling them there is light at the end of the tunnel, is going to be better, and it is getting better. For those who have acceded to the WTO, in every case, there has been real improvement in their economic performance. And that means now increasingly, we talked about youth employment and the employment of women at a better level than has taken place in the past. So we plan to include the ASWAN Cfta in our research and our outreach. One early activity will be for the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's going to be in our outreach, in our podcast, but also through the 4th Regional Dialogue on Wto Accessions for Africa, which will be hosted by the government of Sudan this year. Africa is a focus for the WTO now. It's not just because Dr. Ngozi joined us, but it certainly does help to elevate the issue of development in Africa, to have her at the head of this organization. So we're trying to bring these things, these different strands together. What can African countries do? What can the governments do? Participate. We should get past repeating positions in this organization, the WTO, and move towards practical solutions. Africa needs to be a full participant in the world of digital commerce. It's you talk about innovation earlier. A number of points were made with respect to innovation. Africa has to be a full participant in not only the digital commerce for industry, but the digital commerce for commerce for both services and goods for agriculture. I mean, Africa has a lot of potential in Africa. It can be far more efficient, but the FAO, we and others are working on bringing the digital economy to the African experience. I'll stop there and go to the others' remarks.
No, thank you. I think it's clear. The point is well clear of what the African governments can do. So, Ambassador Muchanga, what do you think of this question?
It's a very good question. I'll answer it in the context of African economic integration. The first answer may not be very pleasant because it's not a very popular topic. And this is the issue of free movement of people, right of residence, and right of establishment. All African governments must commit to that. Because when we do that, we create a common identity. And when we do that, we also make it possible for those Africans who are very well educated to go and settle in another African country where the skills are needed. Right now, restrictions on the free movement of people, right of residence, right of establishment, and the mutual recognition of academic qualifications is one of the biggest non-tariff barriers in intra-African trade. But at the political level, it destroys the spirit of a common identity. If we have a common identity, it's very difficult to fight against each other. A time must come when somebody will not call themselves a Zambian. They should call themselves an African. When a Kenyan was not say, I'm a Kenyan, I'm an African. And similarly for all other nationalities. So that's the first key issue. And with the protocol on free movement of people, right of residence, and the right of establishment, we call upon the African governments to ratify it as a matter of urgency, because we cannot build one African market without common identity. The second one is the process of inclusivity in the African continental free trade area. It should be a project of win-win outcomes. And to this end, we, at the level of the African Union Commission, we have teamed up with the United Nations Industrial Development Organization to undertake a very comprehensive regional value chain mapping exercise covering all the 55 African countries. And the objective is to find out the endowments and comparative advantages of each country. And from there, we can promote investments and make it possible for each and every African country to export to the rest of Africa either finished or intermediate goods. When there's that inclusivity in the African continental free trade area, there will be ownership of the process by each and every African country and government. And when there's that mutual ownership, it's very, very difficult to have situations of war. That's how I would answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very practical. So, Toyin, we are coming to the end of the session.
Yes, yes. So for us, the Trade with Africa framework we developed actually highlights investment focus areas to accelerate growth and development. So for example, we highlight the agriculture value chain, manufacturing, retail, digital, physical, infrastructure development, having enabling policies and fiscal responsibility underpinned by the right level of education for the youth, technology, security, healthcare, human capacity development. These are all areas that I believe each government must pay attention to if they want to remain relevant in the future. The journey to achieving this is long. However, we can focus on laying the solid foundation today that will secure the future of Africa for generations to come. Also, what I want to highlight is that the real currency of trade is actually trust in the private sector. We must find ways to build trust back into the African systems, whether within ourselves or even beyond Africa with the rest of the world. We need to continue to design enabling policies that protects the investments. And we also need to accelerate the adoption of technology for sustained economic growth. I believe this is a perfect time for Africa to leapfrog ahead of the rest of the world. We do not need to recreate other people's past when we can actually create the future of the world for the rest of the world. But in order to do this successfully, we must innovate. But let me leave you with a new phrase I just developed to explain what it takes to innovate. There's no innovation without collaboration, and there's no collaboration without association. And there's no association without relation, and there's no relation without trust. When we trust people, we relate with one another. Once we relate with one another, we bring ourselves in association. Once we're in association with one another, we then start to collaborate. And when we start to collaborate, we start seeing new ways of working. We start implementing new ideas, and that's how we innovate. So let us rebuild trust in the system, because that's the foundation to accelerate trade and achieve our goals. And together, we can build the Africa that we want. God bless you. And I thank you again for this opportunity. Over to you, Dr. Stephen. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And actually, on that note, I had been asked by the ASWAN Forum Secretariat to think of some takeaways. I believe what I would want to say is the following, because I think we are running out of time. We have run out of time. I think the case has been made. It's not even just a case. We have been able to demonstrate clearly through our interventions that trade does actually contribute to peace and security. There are different channels that it does that, either by raising the cost of conflict, or just by the fact that it creates prosperity. And if this prosperity is inclusive, you don't have a situation whereby people would want to go to war. Now, there are some very clear actions, recommendations that have also come from here. I think I like this one of we have to ratify the protocol on the free movement of people, a right of residence and establishment, because again, it's when I identify you as my sister and as my brother and as family that it becomes easier for us to resolve our problems rather than seeing you in a different light. So if we can have this common identity, it will not only facilitate the trade, but it is also going to make us be much more open. I also like the idea, another takeaway that I get from here is that I think we have to participate in the conversations. And I think this is the idea from you, Ambassador Wolff, that we need to participate and exploit the synergies that exist between us, because we'll also be able to share experiences, even with people who are from outside Africa, who have been where we are, and the role that trade has played. And the idea of trust, I think, is at the heart. And I think the trust also comes with identity also. So the idea of trust is also very critical to making people be able to openly trade with each other without any mistrust, because they don't think that you're doing it by cutting corners. You're basically playing by the rules of the AFC Cfta or the WTO rules. So I think this is another takeaway that we can take away from here. But there are quite a number of points that that you have made as panelists, and I really want to thank each and every one of you. It has been a privilege to moderate the session, and I really want to thank the ASWAN Forum for giving all of us the opportunity to be able to put across the views and the points and the recommendations that have come from you. So with this, we bring to the end our session, and hope we'll get another opportunity to interact once again, especially with you, Toyin, because we always interact with Ambassador Muchanga and Ambassador Alan. So it's basically you that we need to connect even more. So thank you very much, and back to you, Nur. So I take it that this brings us to the end of the session.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you so
nice
much.
interacting with you. Bye.
God bless you, sir.
Bye.
God bless you also. Bye.
Bye.